So here's a fun fact nobody tells you about the end of the world. It doesn't come with dramatic music. It comes with a coffee going cold on a console, a private snoring in his chair, and a several-kilometer-long alien warship parked over Lagos like it owns the place. Commander Mira Okonkwo Reyes had been awake for 19 hours when the Threnic Dominion showed up. She knew this because her tablet had helpfully informed her 3 times that her sleep debt was critical, as if she needed a piece of software to explain that governing the planet's response to an alien invasion was, in fact, tiring. "Ma'am," said Private Devon Ash, not lifting his head from where it rested on the console. "Is it Tuesday still, or did we skip into some kind of horror-themed Wednesday?" "Still Tuesday," Mira said. "Get up. Company's here." Devon opened one eye, looked at the main display, and closed it again. "Nope. Going back to sleep. Tell them we're not home." On the screen, 17 ships the size of small moons had arranged themselves in a formation so precise it looked less like a fleet and more like a corporate logo. In the center, the largest of them extended a spindly array of antennae, and Earth's networks lit up with an incoming transmission on every frequency humanity had ever used, plus about 40 it hadn't invented yet. Mira sighed, picked up her coffee, discovered it had gone fully cold, and drank it anyway because caffeine is caffeine. "Put it through," she said. The face that appeared was, generously, humanoid. Gray-blue skin, 4 eyes arranged in a way that suggested evolution had really committed to the bit, and an expression of profound, ancient boredom, like a substitute teacher who has done this exact lesson 11,000 times and stopped carrying around lesson 4,000. "People of Earth," the alien intoned, in a voice that had clearly been run through several layers of translation software and had lost none of its pomp along the way. "I am Overseer Kethril Vun of the Threnic Dominion. Your world has been assessed, catalogued, and found suitable for incorporation. You will surrender your governance, your resources, and your species to Dominion oversight within 1 planetary rotation. Resistance has, historically, proven inadvisable." There was a pause, presumably for dramatic effect. Mira set down her coffee cup with the exaggerated care of someone who wanted the clink to be heard. "Historically inadvisable for who, though?" she said. "Because I feel like that's doing a lot of heavy lifting in that sentence." The 4 eyes blinked, out of sync with each other, which was deeply unsettling and also, Mira thought, kind of impressive as a party trick. "You will comply," Kethril said, a little less smoothly than before. "We'll get back to you," Mira said, and cut the feed. Devon was fully awake now. "Did you just hang up on an armada?" "I put them on hold," Mira said. "There's a difference. Get me the council. And somebody find Dr. Lindqvist. Tell her it's time. Here is the thing about the Threnic Dominion, and I promise this is relevant and not just me editorializing, though it is also that, they had never actually fought a war. Not a real one. In 11,000 years of expansion, they had conquered 400 and some worlds through the simple, elegant strategy of showing up with a fleet so large that the math stopped making sense to anyone doing it, and waiting for the locals to do the reasonable thing. Reasonable, in this case, meaning surrender. It worked because it had always worked. Nobody says no to a civilization that arrives with enough firepower to turn a continent into gravel, especially when that civilization has a legal department larger than most planetary populations and a genuine, if slightly unsettling, enthusiasm for paperwork. The Dominion didn't need to fire a shot. It needed a fleet, a translator, and 400 years of nobody ever calling the bluff. Earth, as it turned out, had some opinions about bluffs. The Solar Defense Council met in a room that had, until 18 months prior, been a converted parking garage beneath what used to be the Swiss Alps ski resort circuit, because nothing says secure bunker like repurposed infrastructure nobody could afford to use anyway during the energy crisis. Mira walked in to find the usual chaos, generals arguing with scientists arguing with each other, and one very tired-looking translator trying to explain to everyone that no, the Threnic word for surrender did not have a softer alternative meaning. She'd checked 4 times. Talk to me, Mira said, dropping into her chair. Dr. Priya Lindqvist stood at the head of the table, looking like she hadn't slept in a week, which, to be fair, described most of the room. She had wild gray-streaked hair pulled back in a bun that had given up on structural integrity hours ago, and the specific energy of a woman who has spent 30 years building something and has just been told, with 24 hours notice, that now is the time to use it. Curtain call is ready, Priya said. A murmur went around the table. Devon, sitting near the back with a tablet balanced on his knee, leaned toward Mira. What's curtain call? You don't have clearance for curtain call, Mira said. I have clearance for everything, I'm your aide. You have clearance to bring me coffee and pretend you understand what's happening. Sit still. Priya pulled up a star map. Sol sat in the center, a small unremarkable yellow dot, and around it, spread across roughly 40 light-years, a scattering of other stars pulsed with soft highlight rings. Back when the Halvorsen probe made first contact with that Kesrath scout ship in 2041, and it went about as well as everyone remembers, a ripple of grim laughter went through the room, because everyone remembered exactly how well that had gone, which was to say, one dead probe and a very unsettling data dump about how the galaxy actually treated new species. The consensus was that eventually, somebody bigger than us was going to come knocking, and we were not going to have a fleet capable of arguing with them. So we built a different kind of leverage. She tapped the display. The stars around Sol brightened one by one. 41 stars within human reach, all of them navigation waypoints, resource hubs, or supply relays for at least 6 known galactic polities, based on the data the Kesrath ship gave us before we, disassembled it for parts. We built stellar shutter arrays around each one. Orbital swarms, technically similar to a Dyson swarm, except instead of harvesting all the energy, we just need to block enough of it to make the star functionally invisible or unreliable from a distance. Dim it, flicker it, mess with its light curves so badly that anyone using it to navigate, farm solar energy, or run supply logistics gets a very bad day. You built curtains, Devon said. 4 stars. I built the biggest porch light switch in the history of the species, Priya said, so that when the neighborhood association showed up to repossess the house, we could point out that we also control several of the lights they use to find their way home. Mira almost smiled. Almost. How long to activate, she asked. Under 10 minutes, once authorized. It's been on standby for 6 years. And the Threnic. Do any of their supply lines run through our 41 stars? Priya's grin was not a nice thing to see. 11 of them directly. Including the relay their reinforcement fleet would have to pass through if this turns into an actual fight. The room went quiet in the specific way that rooms go quiet when everyone realizes, simultaneously, that the plan on the table is either brilliant or a great way to get the planet turned into gravel. So the question, Mira said slowly, isn't whether we can make a threat. It's whether we've got the nerve to make it before they've made good on theirs. Wars have been lost for a lot worse reasons than nerve, said General Adeyemi Osei from across the table, arms folded. Wars have also been lost, Mira said, because nobody called the bluff of a fleet that's never actually had to fight for anything. Priya. Get your team ready. Devon, get me a channel back to Overseer Sunglasses. His name's Kethril. I know what his name is. 22 hours and 40 minutes into the Threnic's 24-hour deadline, Mira opened the channel again. Kethril appeared looking, if it was possible for 4 eyes to convey smugness, extremely smug. You have called to surrender, he said. It wasn't a question. I have called, Mira said, to ask you something. When your fleet came here, which relay did you route through? The Varen cluster, or the one your logistics division calls Beacon 7? There was a pause. A very small, very satisfying pause. That information is not relevant to these proceedings, Kethril said, and something in his four-eyed expression suggested he had, in fact, just realized it was extremely relevant. See, I ask, Mira continued, because I've been doing some light reading on Dominion supply logistics, courtesy of a scout ship your people sent to our system a few years back. Lovely little vessel. Very informative black box. And it turns out an awful lot of your expansion runs on stars you don't own, don't garrison, and definitely didn't ask permission to use as navigation beacons and energy relays. You are stalling, Kethril said. I am, Mira agreed cheerfully. But also, she glanced at Devon, who held up both hands, fingers spread, then folded 3 down. 7 minutes, I'm going to stop stalling, and you're going to have a much worse day than the one you're currently having, which, judging by your face, is already pretty bad. Is that a threat, human? It's a demonstration, Mira said. Consider it a preview. You wanted surrender. I'd like to show you what losing looks like, from a safe and entirely reversible distance, before either of us commits to anything permanent. Kethril's mouth, or the orifice doing mouth duties, opened to respond, and Mira cut the feed again, because honestly, some things are better delivered without a rebuttal. Priya, she said. Do it. Okay, so, I need you to understand something about what happens when you turn off a star that an entire alien logistics network has been quietly depending on for 400 years without ever bothering to check who actually owned it. It's chaos. Glorious, undignified, deeply satisfying chaos. 11 stars, scattered across the routes the Threnic Dominion used to move ships, cargo, and communications through this arm of the galaxy, began to dim. Not vanish, not explode, nothing so crude, just a slow, deliberate stutter in their output, a flicker pattern precise enough that anyone watching from a distance would eventually realize it wasn't natural. Beacon 7, the relay Kethril's own fleet had used to reach Sol, dropped by 60% output within 4 minutes. On the bridges of a dozen Threnic support vessels light years away, navigation systems that had worked flawlessly for centuries began reporting errors nobody had a protocol for. Supply convoys lost their bearing beacons mid-route. A comms relay near what the Dominion's charts labeled Waystation Iberis went dark entirely, and with it, 3 sectors worth of coordination traffic. And on the flagship in Earth's orbit, Overseer Kethril Vun watched his own status boards fill up with red, 1 relay at a time, while a junior officer nearby made a sound that translated, roughly, to a very undignified squeak. Reroute the fleet communications, Kethril snapped. Through what, sir? Beacon 7 just lost 60% output, Waystation Iberis has gone dark, and the Varen relay is, the officer checked something, and went very still. Sir, the Varen relay just spelled something. Spelled something. In the flicker pattern, sir. The officer squinted. It appears to be a translation of the phrase, we can keep doing this all week. Kethril did not say anything for a long moment, which, for a species whose entire diplomatic model was built on nobody ever having the nerve to test it, was possibly the most honest reaction he'd had in centuries. Mira reopened the channel 4 minutes later. Kethril looked, for the first time since the fleet's arrival, like a man, an alien, whatever, who had just realized the ground beneath the negotiation had quietly become a different, much less stable ground. You will restore the beacons, he said. It came out less like a command and more like a request wearing a command's clothes. We will, Mira said, the second your fleet leaves orbit. And I want to be very clear about something, Kethril, because I think there's been a communication gap here, and I don't want you going home and telling your superiors the wrong story. There is no story except your surrender. There's actually a great story, Mira said, and it's this one. A species you assessed as primitive quietly spent 6 years building the ability to switch off 11% of your logistics network on command, and did not tell you, because we were hoping we'd never have to use it. You showed up with 17 ships and a script you've used 400 times, and you didn't stop to ask whether this particular planet had read the same script backward. That's the story. Feel free to tell it however flatters you, but I'd start rehearsing now, because your fleet's going to be asking questions the second the beacons come back and everyone realizes how close this came to being permanent. Kethril's 4 eyes did something complicated, something that might have been the alien equivalent of doing rapid, horrified math. "This is not resolved," he said, but the fire had gone out of it. "No," Mira agreed. "But it's postponed indefinitely, which, where I'm from, counts as a win. Go home, Kethril. Tell them Earth said no. See how that story plays with the other 400 worlds you've been running the same script on." She cut the feed a third time, and this time, nobody called back. The Threnic fleet left orbit 6 hours later, citing, in an official broadcast full of the kind of bureaucratic language that suggested a committee had worked very hard to make an embarrassing retreat sound like a scheduled maintenance procedure, a recalibration of assessment protocols pending further Dominion review. Which, translated out of corporate speak, meant, we got embarrassed in front of our own officers by a planet with no fleet, and we are leaving before this gets worse. Priya brought the beacons back online exactly as promised, and somewhere out past Beacon 7, an untold number of Threnic supply convoys breathed a collective sigh of relief and immediately started asking their superiors some very uncomfortable questions about what else the Dominion hadn't bothered to check before making promises to smaller worlds. Mira found Devon in the mess hall at some ungodly hour, eating cereal directly out of the box because the bowls were apparently a war casualty nobody had accounted for. "So," he said, mouth full. "We won." "We didn't win," Mira said, dropping into the seat across from him. "We made it expensive to find out if they could beat us." "That's different." "That's better, actually. Winning implies it's over." "Feels pretty over." "It's never over," Mira said, stealing a handful of his cereal. "But for tonight, I'm willing to let it feel that way." They sat in the quiet of the mess hall, the kind of quiet that exists specifically after you've spent a day convinced the world might end and then it, against all odds, didn't. "For the record," Devon said, "turning off 11 stars to bluff an armada is the single most unhinged thing this species has ever done, and we invented reality television." "We didn't bluff," Mira said. "We had 11 more stars ready to go if he'd pushed." Devon stared at her. "You're joking." "I'm a diplomat," Mira said, standing, brushing cereal crumbs off her uniform. "I never joke about leverage. Word travels fast in a galaxy full of species who've spent centuries quietly resenting an empire that never gave them a reason to say no. Within a month, 3 separate polities the Dominion had never bothered to properly conquer, only intimidate, sent tentative, extremely cautious feelers toward Sol, not alliances, not yet, just careful, arm's-length questions along the lines of, did you really turn off actual stars, and if so, would you consider teaching a seminar? Earth's official response, drafted by the Solar Defense Council and personally edited by Mira to remove what she called excessive smugness and Devon called the good parts, was polite, measured, and diplomatically neutral. Its unofficial reputation, however, spread a lot faster than any embassy could manage, boiling down eventually into a single line that got repeated, with minor variations, in at least 11 other languages across a dozen star systems: "Don't threaten the little blue planet, because apparently they own the light switch." Mira heard that phrase for the first time 3 weeks later, relayed secondhand through a very nervous, very polite envoy from a species she'd never heard of, and she laughed so hard she had to sit down. "Unhinged," she said, once she'd recovered, but reliably so. "I think I can live with that as a reputation." Devon, standing beside her, raised his coffee in a toast. "To Earth," he said. "The galaxy's most well-lit threat." Somewhere out past Beacon 7, 11 stars burned steady and bright, exactly as promised, and exactly as a warning, and the galaxy, for the first time in 400 years, learned to knock before it let itself in.